In November 2025, the Financial Times dropped a bombshell. An inside investigation called End of the Line: How Saudi Arabia's NEOM Dream Unraveled. For years, we saw glossy renders of a 170-kilometer mirrored city cutting through the desert, sold as the future of urban life. But behind the CGI and slogans, engineers, architects, and insiders were quietly asking a brutal question. Did any of this actually work in the real world? At the center of that dream was one insane showpiece: the hidden marina. Imagine the world's biggest cruise ships gliding through a gate taller than London's Shard into a man-made harbor carved into the sand. Above that, hanging from a colossal arch, a 30-story glass and steel building, the chandelier, suspended upside down in the sky. And on top of everything, 350 meters above sea level, a 45,000-seat football stadium, meant to host matches for Saudi Arabia's 2034 World Cup bid. It sounded like science fiction. The problem was, physics refused to play along. Architects warned the line's bosses that suspending a 30-story building under a massive bridge, in a world where the Earth spins, towers sway, and wind loads shift, might be a bad idea. One designer explained that the chandelier could start swinging like a pendulum, picking up speed until it tore itself away and smashed into the marina below. That wasn't the only absurd detail. When someone asked how basic things like sewage would work in an upside-down office block, the answer reportedly was hundreds of shuttle cars racing back and forth on retractable bridges, picking up waste. This wasn't just futuristic, it was fighting gravity with money. But this is exactly the spirit NEOM was built on. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman didn't just want another Dubai or Doha. NEOM, and especially the line, was supposed to be his proof that Saudi Arabia could leap straight from oil state to sci-fi superpower. A 500-meter-tall wall of mirrored glass running 170 kilometers across the desert, housing 9 million people, powered by renewables, no cars, no streets, no sprawl. Early plans were actually much more normal: a 2-kilometer-wide strip city connected by rail. Then, MBS walked in and said, "What if we flip it into 2 towers?" From that moment, it had to be 500 meters high, 200 meters wide, mirrored, and perfectly continuous. Non-negotiable. Inside NEOM, thousands of top global experts were hired: architects, engineers, construction managers, urban planners. Many were paid huge salaries to live in prefab camps in the desert, eating in common canteens while drawing the future. The schedule was insane. 16 kilometers of the line, 20 modules, were supposed to be ready by 2030, with the first residents arriving as early as 2025. Internally, executives were told the budget for the line was about $1.6 trillion. But as designs got more detailed, an updated estimate landed around $4.5 trillion, roughly the size of Germany's annual economy. That's when the dream began to collide with finance. The scale of materials alone was monstrous. For the first 20 modules, one former employee said they'd need more cement every year than France produces annually. Each 800-meter module required millions of tons of structural steel, millions of cubic meters of concrete, and millions more tons of rebar. One senior manager admitted they'd end up swallowing something like 60% of the world's green steel capacity. To clad the mirrored facade, NEOM would basically have to buy an entire year's output from the world's biggest cladding manufacturer. And remember, all of this had to move through a single, sleepy port 80 kilometers away, connected by one main road into a remote desert site. To make it work, they tried to industrialize the city like a giant product. Every piece of structure was designed to fit in a 40-foot shipping container. Platforms would be pre-assembled in a huge yard next to the line, then moved into place almost like Lego. One estimate said that to build 12 modules by 2030, a container would need to arrive every 8 seconds, 24/7, for years. On paper, it looked like a beautifully optimized supply chain. On the ground, it looked like trying to feed an elephant through a drinking straw. Even if you had unlimited steel and money, you still had to make the line livable. Designers started wrestling with the weird realities of a 500-meter-high wall city. Most public spaces sat deep inside the structure, starved of natural light. The massive stadium spanning the full 200-meter width cast a permanent shadow over everything beneath. Gardens could only be placed on one blade of the building, where there was enough sun. The rest lived in an artificial twilight. Fire safety had to be rethought completely. Instead of evacuating down and out, people would have to escape sideways to neighboring cores. Even simple things like mail delivery, rubbish removal, and insurance policies had to be reinvented from scratch. Transport was another battlefield between fantasy and reality. The story sold to MBS was a high-speed rail line from the airport to the coast in 20 minutes. The small catch? That only works if the train doesn't stop to pick up passengers along the way. Once you add real stations, you don't need high-speed rail. You need a normal metro. But some insiders say it was one of those fantasies you were not allowed to challenge. Even the airport trains themselves were not designed for luggage, because bags were supposed to be picked up from your door 8 hours before your flight by a separate system. Futuristic? Yes. Practical? That's another question. Then came the environmental reality check. The line slices through key mountain passes used by migrating mammals. More importantly, it sits right across major global bird migration routes, including endangered species crossing between Europe, Asia, and Africa. Add a huge wind farm north of the structure, and you've created a deadly corridor. Turbines on one side, a 500-meter glass wall on the other. Engineers proposed dot patterns on the glass to help birds see it, or creating gaps in the facade. But experts warned that even if birds spotted the obstacle, flying 90 kilometers along a mirrored wall just to go around it isn't exactly a solution. Meanwhile, construction had already started. Piling began in early 2022, before detailed building design was even finished. To play it safe, foundations were oversized. Some piles were up to 70 meters long and weighed 850 tons each, among the largest ever built. Roughly 6,000 of them were drilled in over a 2-kilometer stretch of desert at a cost of several $billion. NEOM tried to build not just a city, but a symbol, a vertical iPhone version of urban life, meant to replace the old Nokia of normal cities. In the end, the desert answered like it always does, with silence, sand, and the weight of what's actually possible.